Welcome to the Inspire369 podcast. Joining us today is David Goddard, a revered author and teacher in the fields of spirituality and esoteric tradition. David is widely acclaimed for his deep knowledge and practical teachings on Cabala, Angelic magic, and Western mystical traditions. He has authored several influential books, including The Sacred Magic of Angels, where he offers profound insights into communicating and working with the angelic realms to enhance spiritual growth and personal transformation. David's teachings extend beyond books. He is a guide who has led many seekers through workshops and retreats across the globe, helping them connect with divine forces and unlock higher spiritual potentials. Today, we'll delve into how ancient wisdom is profoundly relevant in our modern world. David, it's an honor to have you with us.
It's good to be with you too, John.
So why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself? How did you get into magic? How did you get introduced to angels in particular?
I was brought up Roman Catholic and went to Catholic schools. But in the library there, I soon found this will date me. I soon found The Third Eye by Lobsang Rampa, which I don't know if you know of the text, but it's okay.
Yeah,
there's a guy who claimed to be a Tibetan Lama and things. But anyway, I went to my spiritual guide, the church one at the time. I was like 16 or so. And I said to him, I said, if ours is the one true faith, which is, of course, is what you were taught as a Catholic, how come there are other people exhibiting, to use Catholic language, exhibiting signs of sanctity? In other words, being able to do semi-miraculous things. But he stood there for a while and then he said, well, it's either the mercy of God or it's the work of the devil. And in that one moment, with my great 16-year-old wisdom, I thought, that's a cop-out. And from then, I started to look at Tibetan Buddhism. One of the earliest Tibetan centers in Europe was founded just over the border in Scotland, Sami Ling. And I went there and things. And from there, that became my major interest. And I was very happy with that until one day one of the lamas said, I don't know about you, but the trouble with all converts is we get over the top. And so, of course, as far as I'm concerned, Tibetan Buddhism was it, and that was me sorted for this incarnation. Until one of the lamas said to me one-on-one, there is a Western equivalent. It's just it's very well hidden because of persecution. I didn't pay too much attention, but it just so happened that I then, in the way the universe does, tripped over people who were into that Western stuff and things. And I kind of realized that Tibetan Buddhism was okay if you were going to do the full works and become a monk and live in a monastery and do all that kind of thing. But also what one needed was, once I became more au fait with the Western tradition, is it spoken language and imagery that were already in our own subconscious mind. And therefore was far easier, just the wrong word, but far more comfortable to work, and was more suitable for our own conditions. And later on, as I developed a bit, which isn't much, it was easier for me to help other people in Western society because it was, using that sort of images and things. So I then came into Cabala, which is the major tradition, and for my sins, I've been doing it ever since.
So the Western equivalent to the Eastern practices of Tibetan Buddhism, Tantra, yoga is magic, right? It's kind of is Kabbalah, working with the Kabbalah, working with and magic in general. Is that an accurate statement?
Well, it all depends what somebody means by magic, of course.
Mm.
It would be wrong to say that, Vajrayana, of the Tibetan form, is magic in the sense of most people use the term. But then I would also apply the same thing to Kabbalah.
Mm.
Kabbalah isn't magic. Magic's just one of the many tools Kabbalah uses. It's always about spiritual development and being of growing, and then in turn being of service. And if it's not, as far as I'm concerned, it's a waste of time. So in this sense, Kabbalah is the kind of Vajrayana. You have to bear in mind, you see, due to persecution, in fact, Kabbalah is the only complete system the West has.
Mm.
All the others are only partial. And so that's always been a kind of problem, I suppose. But then if one's after full development, that's perfectly fine. It's good to have a complete system, So that's the situation, I find myself in. And then, of course, to use a Eastern term, because we're in Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, at some point my teachers said to me, "Oh, you better start teaching yourself." I've been stuck with it ever since.
That's really interesting. The common, advice, especially in the East, is that you need a guru, or that you need a teacher. You need someone to help guide you, especially when it comes to this kind of work. I know for myself, I got into the Eastern traditions early in my spiritual development, and I ran into issues where I would start to develop psychic abilities and work with energy that I wasn't ready for, opening the third eye, and it was very terrifying for me as someone who went from not knowing anything to suddenly astral projecting and this and having these spontaneous experiences. And unfortunately, there was no one to explain what was happening outside of, New Age. I wasn't into magic. I didn't understand. I wasn't familiar with any of that. Certainly not your work or anything like that. So it was I didn't have anywhere to go. And the yoga teachers that I was with weren't able to teach me because they didn't understand either. So it was kind of a interesting dilemma. And,
Yes, one of the problems with the Eastern system for Westerner living in Western society is, of course, that the Eastern system presupposes, if you're doing it for the Hindu approach, just presupposes you're a yogi living in an ashram, or the Tibetan version assumes you're a monk living in a monastery. It doesn't really cater for the lay practitioner. Whereas Kabbalah has always worked for the lay practitioner because it places itself, in amongst the people. I don't mean in a showing off way. I mean, for example, if this is going on a bit much, to stop me. But for example, the other day I was talking with a student and things, and we were touching on the old subject of putting up kind of protections and seals around your space before you do any deep interior work, let alone leaving the body or ritual and things. And I had to end up explaining. I said, well, like me here I am in busy London, and so the space is being impinged all the time by other things, and then of course the other half of the world are asleep, so they can be drifting through and all the rest of it. So that's why we shield and put up the things. It's not to be spooky; it's simply to be spiritually hygienic, you could say, And then after we've completed, we then kind of dissolve it and get on with making the supper.
Yeah, I love that term, spiritual hygiene. That's one of the basic rituals in the Golden Dawn is the Banishing Ritual, the Pentagram, and things like this. What do you recommend that for for new practitioners, and that you've touched on it a little bit, but maybe expand on that, on the purpose of those rituals.
Well, of course, there are several of them. The Banishing Pentagram Ritual is the best known one. Whether it's the best done one, I'm kind of wonder sometimes. Because the trouble, I'll be blunt. The trouble with the Banishing Pentagram Ritual is it scrubs the entire atmosphere of the place it's in. So let's say there you are, living with your girlfriend or with your family, hoping to have a nice domestic life and all the rest of it and things. Every time you do the Banishing Pentagram, every atmosphere of affection and kindness and all those good memories are scrubbed out, because that's what the Banishing Pentagram does. It's like a Brillo pad. Do you have Brillo pads in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, go for it. It's like a Brillo pad. It just wipes the thing out. Which is why I think I put it in Tree of Sapphires, one of my Kabbalah things. The Rose Cross ritual is better. Because it's a Tiferet ritual, and for your listeners, of course, Tiferet means harmony and beauty and all that kind of thing. It's a Tiferet ritual, so what it does is it brings everything into balance in the space, and that's much better. That's why otherwise, if you do the full scrubbing effect, the pentagram, that's why it used to be hoped that you had a spare room where you lived and you would just do those rituals in there. And then, of course, but if you're having to do it in your living room, or share it with the family, it's a problem. You have to kind of, you have to attune what you're doing to what the situation is, really.
That's a really good point. I've experienced that myself, where I would do the Banishing Ritual and just notice that my room, the room that I did it in, was just blank. There's a neutral energy there, and it was very interesting. And I actually had talismans that I created, and when I banished near them, the energy was gone. So it was like, oops. And so I've learned later that you should wrap them in black silk, and to prevent.
I could tell you a really good example of this. I was visiting Montana, and there was a spin-off Golden Dawn group. Of course, there are umpteen spin-off Golden Dawn groups. Anyway, I was visiting and things, and then one morning, the guy who ran it said to me personally, he didn't say it in front of other people, he said, I'm a bit worried. He said, because you can see we have a lovely temple, and they did have a lovely temple. We have this lovely temple and things, and I said, we do really good rituals, and we get lovely atmospheres and blah 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 blah. But the next time we come in, it's all gone. And I said, oh, that's because you start off doing the Banishing Pentagram ritual, isn't it? He said, yes. I said, when the Golden Dawn set up, until it got like permanent temples of its own, it was always hiring church halls and scout halls and things. And that's why it says that the guy running it, or the woman running it, the chief adept, should go in advance, not with the gang, and do the Banishing Pentagram ritual. It's to cleanse all the scout movements, thought forms, and all the rest of it. And then you come in and build in on top. But when you have a permanent temple, you don't do it. Dion Fortune puts it very clearly in print when she says you do not do banishings in a consecrated temple. You may banish if you've invoked a particular energy deliberately, and then with thanks and blessings you give it the soft banishing to go, but you don't walk in and kind of banish all the astral and etheric energy of the room. Otherwise you get no build-up, no sense of abiding sanctity.
Interesting. I've also heard it said that the Banishing Ritual and the Invoking Ritual help strengthen the aura of the adept. What are your thoughts on that?
If you look at the books, they tell every neophyte to do it, and that's usually because they have a very low opinion of neophytes.
Yeah.
So it's being used as a pure self-purification, and it does work like that. But you have to be very clear. You have to make the intention and have your visualizations tight that what you're banishing is your own sphere of sensation, your own aura. That's what's supposed to be being banished and scrubbed up, not the space itself. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And after a while, the Rose Cross becomes better because it introduces the energies of Tiferet, and it's more elevating.
The Rose Cross ritual, I totally agree. It's much more powerful in terms of. I've heard it said that it's essentially the astral lock for your space, and whereas banishing just kind of, banishes the energy, whereas the Rose Cross locks the space, astrally speaking. So
it attunes it to Tiferet. Yes,
right.
So then nothing that isn't of Tiferet can enter.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Makes your space aligned with that. One of the things that you mentioned was the idea of thought forms, and for people who may not be familiar with what a thought form is, can you kind of go in on that a little bit?
Yes, a thought form is a deliberate obsession. Really, if you think about it, humans, we do thought forms all the time. You could call the untrained version, you could call it fantasy. But it's like, you've read this book, or you like this particular band of music, or you like somebody you've seen on TV or whatever, and if you keep doing them long enough, they become like thought forms. Most of them are harmless most of the time. Whereas the deliberate way of doing it in the art, of course, is to visualize with intention, and that's to keep creating it over and over, but under control. So, am I making any sense?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. It's an obsession. So one thing that I've heard of a thought form is the idea of anger. If you could create a thought form which then feeds on more anger by influencing the person it's attached to get angry, right, or irritable at certain things, and it's different than, from what I understand, what you would consider a demon or a negative intelligence, because it's almost like an artificial intelligence. Is that kind of?
Yeah, is that a thought form can become kind of like a low grade entity, kind of, but usually it's still kind of attached to the creator's own aura and mind and complexes and things. It rarely goes beyond that. But what usually happens at a later stage, unless they get it under control, is they go a bit wacky, and then they don't do anything, thank God. And that's it, really. But and after all, that's why psychiatry now exists. Because it's thought form obsession.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So maybe a lot of if
it's a thought form, go to a psychiatrist. If it's a demon, go to an exorcist.
Right.
So it's an easy choice.
Yeah, it almost makes you think that maybe a lot of the psychological issues people have are related to thought forms and attachments. It might be something like that, into that.
Well, that's why we come back to our friend, the Rose Cross, for the cleansing of the aura, because that gets rid of the thought forms that one has built up consciously or unconsciously.
Fascinating. I want to shift into the concept of angels. So first off, I guess, how would you describe angels? What are they?
Well, according to the tradition, angels are the first created things. In Kabbalah, you have like 4 levels of worlds. So you have like the divine frequency, the spiritual frequency, then what we would call the astral frequency for the sake of a term, and then Asiya, the physical level. So the angelics are the first of creation and things, and they were appointed to carry on with creation, but also to oversee it. So, I mean, you just can't number the number of angels that are in creation and things. So that everything, and they are in a sense, but probably not a good example, so please take it with a large pinch of salt. They're probably in a certain sense the thought forms of the divine mind.
Interesting. Wow.
Because they're created in that way. But then in the ultimate sense, so is thee and me.
Yeah.
Except we're given the work of working with free will, which is something the angels aren't given. So some of them are concerned with, everything's overseen by them. So just as far as this planet's concerned, you have like the angels of nature, the devas, and every mountain, and is overseen by and maintained by species, the plants and animals and things are overseen by them. And then at the higher level, what we would in Kabbalah call like the Sephiroth, so the higher levels of being, is each one is overseen by an archangel. An archangel is like a big angel. It's overseen by an archangel. So in a certain sense, everything in existence is overseen by them. Their function is to maintain creation and to nurture it.
And there's associations with planets for a lot of the archangels.
Yes.
Can you go into that a little bit? Kind of how that relates?
Well, it relates simply from the point of view that everything's overseen by. So you have, like, as I said, angels of like mountains and things, but then of course you get an archangel for a planet. So in the Kabbalist tradition, the archangel Sandalphon is for the entire planet Earth. But then the ancients also had them for each of the known planets. So in astronomy and things, there are names given to the planets and things. But then you go up the levels and things, and then you have the angels set over each of the planets and things. And they will abide with that planet until it's dust. They abide in the work, in the real sense of the word.
Yeah.
They contain and they care for things. They are embodiments of divine love, but that doesn't mean they're soppy.
That's true. I think a term in your book, you call them the governors, I believe, if I remember that correctly, the governors of the logos, or I believe you can use that term. Is that kind of an accurate statement, that the logos is the sun, and then the planets kind of regulating the energy coming from?
If you were to think of this solar system as a kind of entity, let's call it that, for want of a sake, or I think a field of evolution might perhaps be a better way of looking at it. You have the solar logos, the sun, S-U-N, which is, a much higher orb of influence. And of course, in Kabbalah, that's like the Tiferet of the entire solar system and things. But the planets in turn, and thus the angels set over them, they're like the chakras of the solar system. That's why even in alchemy to this day, planets are still used as code for what the East calls chakras. So if we say, your Mars center, we're talking about the navel center. If we say the moon center, we mean the pituitary gland, etc.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so they all kind of correlate with each other. And because there are qualities of the planets to which we can resonate if we choose, that's where you get the idea of invocation of particular angels for particular things. And then from a more kind of direct sense, as you know, those angels in turn have rulerships, not just over parts of the body, but also over areas of human life. And that's why we are permitted to invoke angels if we're having some kind of difficulty that we've tried the best we can do, and that's not delivering the goods. So we can invoke, or what they're saying is petition, a particular angel for assistance.
In your book, what you go over some of these correspondences, right? If you wanted to do certain things with, communication, you would invoke Raphael, or and those sorts of things. What are those? Can you just briefly kind of go over those for listeners, kind of with those correspondences and why you would invoke certain angels?
Well, the first thing has to be consider is this is just to stop people burning their fingers. The angels aren't there to be at one's beck and call. One's permitted to call upon them if one is unable to get the result oneself. In other words, you've tried your best and it's not working. Maybe magically, you've tried in your life, for the best of things. Or it's an illness that's been despaired of by medics or whatever. You see what I mean? Or a repetitive pattern that just doesn't seem to shift, that needs some kind of oversight. So it's not right really to say, I'm splitting hairs here, but like in the Angelic book, what you're precisely dealing with is petitions, not invocations. It's a thin line, but nevertheless, it's still kind of relevant. And as you probably know, you know of either yourself or other people. There are thousands now who have done petitions to the angels and then get, results and things. And what's the beauty, because the sacred magic of the angels is really very kind of straightforward, clear thing. Mages can and do use it, and some of them are quite horrified because they get such good results with it. And they think, I've been walking around dressing up and I just did this. And I think the beauty about it is, is that having made the petition, you are told, in what period of time you will get an omen. An omen is like a green light from the angel to let you know that it will take over on the matter. And that, not just that, is that there's one thing about doing one of the things about invocations is even if you've done one and your experience says things to yourself, oh, that was successful. If it's still hanging on a bit, I'm not talking about angels now, I'm talking about magic generally. After a little while you think, I'm sure something should have happened by now. And then you lose your faith in it and things, and then you just, what did I do wrong, and all this kind of thing. Whereas with the angelic system, you do the petition, you get the omens if it's going to be accepted, and then you also know in what time frame the result is going to occur.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about your book. Is that it's not a typical magic book or manifesting might talk about, exerting your will and to get what you want, right? That's a very left-hand path thing, very common in a lot of magic, unfortunately. But what I really was attracted to about your book was that not forcing your will. You're petitioning, and in that sense, it's very safe, right? It's a very safe form of magic, and also it forces you to do the work to get there. You know, I've heard it said, and I believe it may have been in your book, but angels will, you know, you have to do most of the work. Angels will assist you, but you have to show that you're willing to work. You can't just ask for a car.
Yes,
and then,
you're willing to fulfill your side of it and things. Or it may be something that you've tried to do many times yourself and have not been successful at. So then that's also then permitted. I mean, to use theistic language, it's a petition is basically to the angel as the agency, but it's basically saying, if this is the divine will, may such and such happen.
Yeah, and I love that. It's ultimate free will, you know, allowing free will to exist completely without the possibility of violating, because if the angels are involved, there's no way, you know, it would violate.
So there's no possibility of like bad karmic kickback. You know.
Right, which is awesome. And one of the rituals in your book, which I found particularly powerful, is the ritual of the full and new moons. Can you go over the importance of the moon in terms of magic, in particular those rituals?
Are these the ones for doing the invoking tablet of the moon, the banishing?
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Well, they come under the rulership of Archangel Gabriel, because Gabriel is the Archangel of the moon. He's also pops up quite a lot in the scriptures of the world, not just in the Christian Bible, but of course he was the one who took the Quran to Muhammad. You know, he also is the one who takes Moses up Mount Sinai. So I mean, he's a busy angel. So the moon has tides. So the major tide, what we call the invoking tide, is when the moon is new up until full moon. That's what we call a waxing tide. In other words, astral energy is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And so astral energy is also life energy, life force and things. So it's great for anything to do with, for things to increase, you know, bounty or health, you know, ill health becoming, you know, thing. So the waxing tide is used for invocation, in that sense of to invoke what is good. And then 2 days after full moon is then the waning tide. Usually in most magic, the waning tide tends to be avoided where possible, because it is, you know, the time when the life forces are diminishing. And it's the time when the opposition, the powers of darkness, get their go, so to speak. But having said that, there's also, as you know from the system, there's also a skillful use of the waning tide, which is to banish what is no longer wanted in one's life. And since it is the season where things die away, you know, again, subject to the great will, it's like, you know, may this illness pass away, or may this poverty pass away, or may whatever it is. So they're used. If it's something that is desired to grow and to flourish and to prosperity, it's the waxing tide, when the moon from new to full. And then full moon to dark of the moon, which is the night before another new moon, will cause things to, as I say, pass away and cease to be.
Why do you think that is? I know you mentioned the moon affecting the astral, but why else do you think that the moon is so central and so important to magic in general?
I think, I'm not saying categorically, because I don't have any ambitions to be an infallible pope. But my thought on the subject is, it's just my opinion.
Sure.
Is I think it's probably to do with the same reason that physically the moon is so close to the Earth that it affects the tides of the sea, and it affects human beings and all other plants and things. You know, I mean, the almanacs just show how, you know, plants flourish under the presence of the moon in that waxing high. So it's, well, I think that they're just all connected, you know.
Yeah.
The life itself comes under Gabriel's rule, and, you know, new to full, it flourishes and becomes brighter. Full to dark of the moon, it diminishes and withers.
It's fascinating how, you know, nature is a metaphor for our own internal workings in that sense, which I find really interesting. Particularly the changing the seasons, right? And you can really feel the energy. Right now, it's close to fall, and you can really
it's been just like our autumn equinox.
Yeah, and you can really feel that change and that shift from summer to fall. Things are becoming more mellow, becoming a lot more introspective, which is interesting. And the idea of a moon angel, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so moon and sun angels, they're determined by one's birth chart, or one's horoscope, as it used to be called. This is the idea, of course, that, and it's still held in magic and things, it's at the moment of breath, of the first breath, when the baby takes the first breath, that a kind of hologram of the universe is kind of imprinted onto them. So that would sort out a lot of the problems people have with thoughts about abortion and things. You know, astrology for centuries had said that actually, until the drawing of breath, the soul hasn't even entered into the body. And we know for a fact anyway that young babies and things, the soul goes in and out of the body during the growth, because that small little body can't take the full force, the full soul, you know, continuously. But anyway, it's another matter. And it's not my business to tell people what to do on those things. So at the moment of breath, because that's how horoscopes worked, is, you know, the time you were born. Well, that means the breath. The Egyptians used to call the birthday the festival of the drawing of breath. You know? And you find it also in Hinduism and things, and you know, in their form of astrology and things. So basically, it's simply doing where were the planets at the moment you drew breath. So, you know, the sun would have been in a particular sign, and the moon would be in a particular sign. And so from there, you get this sun angel and the moon angel of the individual. It's as straightforward as that, really. Yeah,
that's fascinating. So in your experience working with angels, well, let me see. I have there's one other question regarding gifting angels, which I thought that was a fascinating concept in your book, and it's something very totally novel, which I've never heard anyone describe, is the idea of gifting an angel with, you know, because what could we possibly offer a divine being? And in your book, you describe sending them a happy memory, something of a loving memory, and can you expand on that a bit?
Yes, but first I'd like to just quickly touch on something that you said, just to clarify. An angel isn't a divine being. An angel is a celestial being.
Celestial being, yeah. Yeah, okay.
You know, so that's
that makes sense.
Astral, Briatic level.
Yes.
Anyway, but the idea of gifting, yes, because if we are fortunate, we have experiences that no angels ever had. And in the usual course of events, things won't have. You know? So to present it with something that is kind of unique to human experience, I mean, something positive, you know. And I mean, it's not like you're giving it away, you're sharing. And that kind of helps the angel in its own kind of development. I mean, I'm going to give you a negative because obviously negatives are easier. But for example, during World War I, there were all those terrible trenches and the gases and all those kind of things. We know that a lot of human souls got trapped in those trenches and things. But the general consensus is they didn't empty till about 1980.
Interesting.
And the angels would go to minister, but they didn't minister in the way we might think they would. In as much as, you have to bear in mind, there are some things angels don't understand because they've never experienced them, and they're not built to experience them. They couldn't, even if they wanted to. And so that is, grief. How do you explain to an eternal being what loss is? It just doesn't compute, Spock.
Yeah.
What's going, or what sorrow is, or all those things. What the angel sees is that the aura of the person is now thick and muddy and grey, so that the angel thinks thick, muddy, grey aura, and shines light on it till it gradually dissipates that aura, and then from the angel's point of view, the job's done. It's not the same thing as understanding. And this is why you could say, are humans, where they play their part in the whole thing. We are brought into incarnation to understand, but that's the whole thing. That's why it's then God can become God.
Yeah,
we can understand things about the Creator that even most of the archangels, apart from Metatron, couldn't understand. It's not in their experience, and they don't have the wherewithal, the capacity to do it.
Wow, that's a really very interesting point. So the idea is that most people think of angels as that they should have this innate understanding, or they should have this thing, but the concept is you have something that they don't have, which is very, very interesting. And I've heard it said that when working with angels, sometimes they can be very strict, or sometimes they can be very short. In your experience, has that been the case for you, or have you heard about that?
Well, firstly, it's on the first bit. I mean, people say, "Oh, angels are, they don't get this or they get that." I mean, the New Age Brigade, God spare the New Age Brigade, and they're enough to make angels shudder. But they think, "Oh, I spoke to angel, and the angel loved this," and and there we are. But as I say, it's beyond the angels' kind of understanding. What was the second half of the question?
Well, just reading experiences. In my particular case, I've had nothing but positive.
What about them being short?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's because of the way they communicate. Angels aren't talkers, much as the New Age Brigade would like it to be so. After all, when they communicate with us, what do? They send an omen. They don't come and sit down and start knitting and giving you a long conversation about what they're going to do and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I mean, in communication with an angel, even telepathically, even if you've shifted onto the astral yourself, if you get a sentence, you're doing well. They're not created to do that. It's not their function. That's why there's the inner plane adepti. Humans have evolved to a point of thing, because they can commune with us, in the full sense. It's not the function of angels, So occasionally you might get a yes or a no, but even then it's not a guarantee, because if that was the norm, why bother with omens?
Yeah. Yeah.
If they could easily turn around and go yes or no,
right.
even
right.
that, what's the point in having an omen?
Right. And it may have.
See what I mean?
I see what you mean. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, let's take it to a lower notch. If you look like in spiritualism and things, when they talk about some spirit and skies and all those sort of things, again, it's on this kind of minimalistic kind of thing that one and I mean this happens in high magic too. I mean, you do an act of magic, but if you've got any sense at all, you will ask the powers that be for signs following, so that the magic's taken, and it's going to work. Otherwise you're twiddling your thumbs, for who knows how long. Signs following are very, very important, because and that was the thing, you see, like with the angelic system. That was the thing that got lost, you see, is because this whole idea of omens and signs following had, kind of got lost. People would put it down and they think, oh, it's something like you've got in medieval magic or whatever. Yes, I suppose the trouble is, Northern Europe and those other nations that sprang from it, just became too intellectual and too kind of, and thought everything had to be like that particular way. But I mean, you only have to read things like, Dion Fortune, all those ones, and she'll say, I will not move without signs following.
Fascinating.
And the usual rule of thumb for signs following, the usual rule is 7 days. Of course, there are exceptions, as you know, in the angelic too. So you see, it's not just about the communication of angels in that sense, omens. It's also the inner plane teachers. You may have thought you got the message correct or whatever, but it's permitted to say, may I have signs following.
And that's
we're not designed at this point in magical, and by this I mean spiritual development. This isn't a thing about faith anymore. It's about gnosis. It's about knowledge. And so, I desire to know in order to serve is the great saying. So we're not expected, true mages aren't expected to go around on blind faith.
Right.
Wrong job.
I love that. That's amazing. And I feel like the idea of, I feel like in a sense, asking for blind faith almost is a way to not lower yourself, but kind of, I'm struggling with the words, but the idea that, you are just supposed to do as you're told and kind of, not think for yourself, that kind of thing. Yeah.
That thinking was invented by priesthoods who had lost the knowledge.
Yeah.
To cover up the fact that they didn't know either. Don't worry, my son, just believe, it will be fine.
Right. Here's power, it's about power control. And
well, it's also to cover up their loss of real knowledge.
Yeah.
They were no longer in contact with the divine or with the powers that be. In
your books, you talk about healing the wasteland. And I love that metaphor, obviously from the King Arthur legends. But can you kind of go into that a bit more? As you quite rightly say, it's taken from Arthurian thing to heal the wasteland. But of course, it's not just a nice symbol. Unfortunately, it's a absolute fact on our planet now. We've devastated thousands and thousands of miles of it, or we've, cut down forests, and we've done this and all those. So we've created a wasteland. So I use the term healing the wasteland so that people could learn how to do things that would help the
the nature spirits in particular to kind of flourish. You see, one of the troubles is that as any mage knows after a while, is the emotion you have, the emotion you have when you do a piece of magic colors it. Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's all well and good if it's something positive. Which is why we do various meditations or attune to various planets to turn on a particular emotional frequency. But if you do something out of fear, it attracts what is feared. Because that's the emotion that's in flow. And that's why it was very important when I was trying to pass on this stuff in Restoring Eden, that people learn more about the spirits of nature and about the dryads of the trees and things, and the great angels who preside over nature. Yet again, there are angels over nature. So that by getting in rapport means you develop fondness, and therefore you're doing something from an emotionally positive and vibrant point of view, rather than not just what you have in the ecological movements, which I don't blame them for, because it's all they know, but it's all fed with the fear consequence. So, but just to touch very quickly on the angels of nature, I mean, as an example, the angel who presides over one mountain, yes, was put in that place when that mountain was first raised up, and will remain there until it passes away again. But it's also responsible for every blade of grass, every plant, every animal who lives on the mountain. The mountains affect upon the weather patterns and the continental whole things, the whole ridges and things. It's a huge, kind of, development. So like next week, because usually once a year I do a 5-day residential thing of working with angels, and there's a very nice place down out of the city in the countryside where we go and things. It's just fortunate that place also has nice unearthed forest around it. So though we're doing angels, I always manage to sneak a bit of green ray stuff in as well. So I'm bummed I can't go. I wish I lived in the UK and could go to that, because I actually wanted to go last year. I heard about it and I was like, dang, it was like such short notice. But I'm gonna have to make a plan for next year to go, because I absolutely really do. And that spot is very beautiful. It looks wonderful. Yes, it's an old, and it was in old times. It was monastic land. Interesting. Yeah. Well, I wonder, just really quickly, speaking of land and sacred land, maybe you said you're in the UK. As we all know, megalithic structures are everywhere there: Stonehenge, Avebury, and whatnot. What are your thoughts on those? Just really quickly. Any idea on the purpose of them? In the same way that the human body has veins and arteries, and in its etheric body it has meridians and all the rest of it and things. So the same is true of the planet. I mean, that's how it's done. And so the ancient priesthoods with knowledge would, where these lines would converge or cross, they would establish a sacred center. Why? Because they knew that when these come together, they create a whirl of force, almost like a chakra in the planet, so to say, and it spins, and then it goes off with more energy and thus renders the land more fertile, but also uplifts all of life, all the animals and things, and all the humans who live in the ambience and things. And so you find more centers when land is hilly, and that's because on flat land, ley lines, to say, run in straight lines. But when you come to like a hill or a mountain, they begin to spin, you know. And so that's why like in Egypt, there's few ley lines because it's such a straight, you know, flat place and things. Whereas in Tibet, you get, you know, these things built on every mountaintop you can almost think of, you know, and that kind of. So, but also in the hands of a priesthood with knowledge, it wasn't just about the fact that the earth center moved, which is why they could do certain rituals there, you know. And it's good for ordinary people like Wiccans and things, if they do outdoor stuff on the earth to bless the earth. I mean, that's all well and good. But the higher priesthood also was, they would do out the ritual, but they would also then draw down from above, you know, from the stars and things, so to marry heaven and earth together. So, and that's really the purpose behind almost all sacred edifices of any kind that are done with knowledge. I mean, for example, we're lucky here that a lot of the cathedrals that exist in Britain now are on the old sites of, you know, the old things, as well as those which are still left standing.
It's fascinating. Wow. Well, thank you, David. I appreciate your time. I know you had to run, but yeah, this is a fascinating conversation. I really
thank you
appreciate
very
your
much,
time.
Tom.
Yeah, thank you so much.